let's not speak too soon. Okay, if everybody could take their seats. We're a bit behind schedule, so we can get started as soon as possible. Just one more minute. Get the door closed. Okay. I think we can get started. That's great. We have 3 panelists today instead of 5, but still, I'm sure we'll have a more than fruitful conversation with the panelists that have joined us. Welcome, everybody, to this session on climate change and energy transition. I'm Andrea Sankey. I'm the host of the Newsmakers on TRT World News. And, yesterday when I opened the summit, I mentioned how relevant the timing of the Анталия Diplomacy Forum was, given what's happening as we speak right now between Ukraine and Russia. Today I can actually stress how relevant this panel is, given European leaders in particular have been talking extensively and specifically about energy transition. If you saw any part of that your EU summit yesterday, that summit was spent in no small part addressing how to deal with energy transition, mostly due to a need that EU leaders identified to stop relying on Russian energy supplies. President Macron of France actually made a point of congratulating Germany for its commitment to transitioning to green energy faster than its counterparts. But, and this is a big but, we have to remember, of course, that energy transition is not just about geopolitics. The elephant in the room is the global emergency that we call climate change. Now, goals have been set and they have been reset, trying to limit the warming of our planet to 1.5 degrees maximum. Very sadly and frighteningly, actually, we are not on track to get there by 2050, as the IPCC just revealed in its second report. The predicted results of that failure are really unimaginable for billions, not millions, billions of people on our planet. We've already seen many of the extremes, the staggering record heat waves, prolonged droughts, flooding, polar vortexes, all leading to massive increases in poverty, migration, hunger, illness, and even death. It is that grim. Now, the EU has said that it is massively investing in renewables, but is that enough? What about the rest of the world's biggest polluters? What are their alternatives? And if they don't act, what will be the consequences, especially for less developed countries finding themselves the most adversely affected by climate change? There really is so much at stake for all of us, as we know. So we're hoping today that our panelists can bring some clarity as to what's expected and what's needed to bring positive change to our production and consumption of energy amid the climate crisis. So now I have the pleasure of introducing my very distinguished panelists. Immediately to my left, Ismail Ould Sheikh Ahmed is the Foreign Affairs Minister of Mauritania. Mbella is the Minister of External Relations for the Republic of Cameroon. And Ambassador Haki Akil is also Chief Advisor to the Board Chairman of Çalık Energy in Turkey, and former Turkish ambassador. Thanks so much for being with us. Listen, I'd like to begin by establishing each of your greatest concerns right now in this space. What you identify as the most urgent in respect to managing and expediting energy transition and hopefully curbing climate change.
Thank you very much. So let me say that this is definitely, as we all know, a very important subject that we are all discussing these days. We have been hearing since 2015, particularly after Paris Agreement, how these issues, I think, are becoming really on the top of the international agenda. And clearly, it's a very large and complex subject, and therefore, as your question says, what are your main concerns? Let me maybe focus on the region which I know the best, which is the Sahel, But the Sahel is large enough that what I'm going to talk about is probably going to be also of interest to many of us. And it's certainly a very well, I would say, unknown region to many of us, but a region which is very, very affected by the climate change. And then, of course, I will, hopefully on my second round, go more specifically to the energy and our prospect, which probably look much better than what is our current situation. So in regard to the current situation, I would say that the Sahel region is one of the poorest and most environmentally degraded in the world. Since 1970s, the Sahel has warmed twice as fast as the rest of the world. So quite worrying, I would say, because that's the reality we are facing. The Sahel is heating up at an alarming rate, and that's something we need to keep in mind. Obviously, why is this a concern? Because this is, as you rightly said in your introduction, affecting the water, and as we know, water is life, is affecting the fisheries, is affecting the livestock and agriculture. Therefore, the livelihood of the people are seriously affected by this. But what we have seen with the climate change, which is pretty amazing and surprising, is the fact that we also, when we have probably successive 3 or 4 years of drought and complexity, then we have suddenly, in recent years, enforced the flooding. For instance, in 2020, more than 2 million people were displaced and affected by the climate change and the effect of flooding in this case. So this succession, obviously, of flood and drought, which we have seen in other parts of the world, is also something we have been witnessing in the case of the Sahel. The other characteristic of the Sahel countries, and we speak here about pretty large, as I said, population and surface in terms also of the geographic area, is the fact that we have one of the youngest and fastest growing population globally. And you will tell me what is the link between this demographical aspect and the climate. The reality is, in fact, that the climate degradation and the scarcity of water in particular fuels inter-community tensions and, of course, the displacement of population, migration outside of the Sahel to Europe, but also within, from one region to another. And that is certainly one of the major factors of the tension we see in the Sahel. When we speak about terrorism or we speak about tension or conflict, they are not, as many believe, only, some would like to see it like that, religiously driven. They often are driven by the problem of the environment. So it's no secret to say that people of the Sahel are among the least responsible for global warming, yet they will and they suffer currently the most from its consequences, something everybody knows. Therefore, what I wanted to say simply in conclusion to this first part probably of your question is to say that the ongoing merely military response to the terrorism in the Sahel or to the, let's say, conflict needs to be supported by a program addressing root causes, not just the symptom, meaning program related to waters, to education, to community development projects, and particularly I would say in the G5 countries, which as you know are Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso and Chad, which are clearly not only affected by security issues, but this is definitely compounded, this is completely amplified by the effect of the climate. So I will stop here and maybe come a bit later to speak about the energy transition as we see it from the consequences of this terrible situation.
Absolutely. I do have a follow-up question for you on that, but we will come back. Mbella, go ahead.
Je voudrais d'abord vous remercier pour le panel auquel nous appartenons et vous remercier pour la question posée. Moi, je voudrais, à la suite de mon collègue, dire que le problème de changement climatique et de réchauffement climatique sont devenus des problèmes mondiaux et qui sont des problèmes transnationaux. De même que nous avons eu les grandes pandémies pour lesquelles la communauté internationale s'est mobilisée, comme récemment la COVID-19, nous pensons qu'aujourd'hui, le problème climatique, le changement climatique et les problèmes liés à ce que vous avez appelé le réchauffement climatique nécessite la collaboration et la coopération internationale. C'est pour cela que les décisions qui ont été prises à la COP 21 à Paris et même à la COP 26 à Glasgow sont des problèmes d'importance et les décisions qui ont été prises. Vous avez évoqué vous-même qu'il faudrait ramener la température du globe à peu près à 1,5 degrés Celsius. Mais pour y arriver, il faut que tous les pays consentent à mettre en œuvre les décisions qui sont prises au niveau de ces grands forats. Alors, les décisions prises, c'est d'abord que tout le monde réduise les gaz à effet de serre. Est-ce que les grands pollueurs aujourd'hui le font? Est-ce que les grands pays industriels le font par rapport à nos jeunes pays qui sont moins pollueurs, mais qui sont également atteints par les conséquences, n'est-ce pas, de ces changements climatiques? Le Cameroun, à travers la politique de son président, a souscrit à ces engagements. Nous travaillons pour ramener le gaz à effet de serre de 32 à 35%. Nous travaillons pour lutter contre la déforestation, qui est l'un des problèmes qui est très préoccupant pour les populations communautaires, surtout dans les régions rurales, où les paysans s'attaquent aux forêts pour pouvoir avoir le bois de chauffe. Nous travaillons pour limiter une telle situation en mettant en place une politique édictée par le gouvernement qui vise d'abord à développer les centrales hydroélectriques pour permettre à ces populations villageoises de disposer de l'électricité. Nous travaillons aussi beaucoup pour le développement des énergies renouvelables, pour permettre ainsi à toutes les populations de ne plus recourir forcément au bois de chauffe. Et c'est dans ce contexte, madame, que notre gouvernement a développé une grande politique dans le cadre de ce que nous appelons, et que vous connaissez mieux que nous, les énergies solaires. Le Cameroun appartient à l'Alliance internationale de l'énergie solaire, et cette énergie solaire est en train d'être développée amplement dans notre pays. Nous utilisons également le recours maintenant à ce qu'on appelle l'énergie éolienne et les biomasses, donc pour permettre que nous puissions ainsi apporter notre contribution à la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique. Mais je voudrais dire que les problèmes sont connus et les préoccupations également sont progressivement adressées. Au stade où nous sommes dans ce panel, moi je pense qu'il y a quelques 3 ou 4 ou 5 propositions que nous voulons soumettre au débat pour essayer de voir comment on peut avancer dans ce secteur-là. La première des choses que nous estimons, c'est qu'en Afrique, par exemple, dans nos pays, il manque de structures d'alerte. Il faut mettre en place les mécanismes d'alerte pour les cataclysmes, pour les inondations, pour les précipitations qui affectent nos pays. Ces mécanismes d'alerte permettent de suivre l'évolution du changement climatique et de prévenir les populations contre les désastres qu'on connaît souvent dans tous les pays, que ce soit les inondations, que ce soit les problèmes comment vous appelez, les problèmes liés aux incendies, exactement, et des problèmes liés au glissement des terrains, etc. Le deuxième point que nous voulons suggérer au-delà du mécanisme d'alerte qu'il faut mettre en place, c'est l'introduction dans la gestion des problèmes climatiques de la digitalisation. Il faut qu'on aide nos pays à entrer très fortement dans la politique de digitalisation pour pouvoir gérer ainsi ce problème auquel nous sommes confrontés. Nous pensons également qu'il faut mettre en place une forte politique de renforcement des capacités, parce que jusque-là, nos systèmes d'éducation étaient axés pratiquement sur le modèle traditionnel connu, le droit, l'économie, les lettres, etc. Ce sont des filières qui sont encore importantes. Mais nous souhaitons qu'aujourd'hui, il y ait toute une philosophie mise en place pour la formation dans le domaine climatique, dans le domaine de la transition. On parle de transition climatique, on parle de réchauffement climatique, ça se dit à la radio, à la télévision, mais nous constatons qu'il y a très peu de gens qui sont formés pour pouvoir adresser les véritables problèmes de cette situation que nous vivons. Nous sommes aussi d'accord qu'il faudrait mettre en place une véritable politique de protection civile. La protection civile dans les problèmes climatiques, elle est très importante pour pouvoir venir en aide aux populations de manière rapide et de manière appropriée. En fait, si vous permettez que je puisse peut-être m'arrêter là pour pouvoir continuer, nous souhaitons aussi qu'il faudrait mettre en place des banques de données. Souvent on parle de ces cataclysmes-là, mais on n'a pas parfois des données comparatives entre les situations antérieures et les situations présentes et voir les situations à venir. Comment les gérer sur le plan des analyses statistiques. Donc il faut créer des centres de traitement de ces données qui sont liées aux problèmes climatiques. Voilà ce que je peux dire pour le moment comme proposition et contribution que nous apportons. Nous restons à disposition pour répondre à d'autres questions. Je vous remercie.
Right. Learn from experience. That's valuable, simple but very valuable advice. I think we need to see a lot more of that. Okay, Haka Akil, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam. I would like to start by welcoming our honorable ministers to Turkey. And I would like also to thank Анталия Diplomacy Forum to include that important topic on the agenda of the meeting, because in the past I have been participating to different negotiations on behalf of the government. Today on the climate change and also clean energy, I am working rather on the side of private sector. So I can say that, of course, I fully agree with what has been said by honorable ministers regarding the climate change. And I remember in '92 in Rio, when we started those discussions, the public opinion was not very aware of the importance of the climate change, neither the politicians. We started to negotiate in Rio. Later on, we had different COP negotiations, and then the public opinion and also the politicians started to see the importance of the climate change. But of course, the climate change negotiations had also in the past and even today some economic connotations also. So the position of the developing countries and developed countries were not exactly the same. Although we were aware of the danger, the expectation of the developing countries and the developed countries was blocking, the different expectation negotiations. I remember I have one colleague here who participated to Copenhagen negotiations on the climate change, because the developing countries were saying that the industrialist countries polluted the world, and now they would like to share the burden with the developing world. So they were thinking that it was their right to expect from the developing world some big, important financial contribution for their effort for climate change. So the negotiations were, let's say, rather concentrated on the financial issues of the climate change. Then, hopefully, in Paris, we were able to reach an agreement. Now, the public opinion is putting a lot of pressure on the politicians on that issue, and they are right. I mean, now we all know that the climate change is a real problem, as it was underlined by our ministers. We have a lot of natural disasters due to climate change. So the energy, of course, is among the, let's say, source of the climate change. So when I was working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on the one hand, I had an energy department under my responsibility, and on the other hand, the environmental department under my responsibility. And it was very funny to see how they were fighting each other. And when we will come to clean energy issues, I will try to explain what the private sector can do and must do to reach clean energy and to try to fight climate change. So at this stage, I would like to stop here because everything has been said already by Honorable Minister. So I want to avoid repetition for the sake of gaining some time for the audience to ask questions.
No problem. Yes, I'm just going to ask a few more questions myself, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. You know, I asked in my brief introduction there if what the world's biggest polluters are doing is enough to try and curb the climate change that's causing so much destruction actually in less developed countries. I know I spoke about the EU in my introduction, but if we look at China now, it's one of the top 2 polluters on the planet, and we're now hearing that their production of fossil fuels is set to increase because of what's happening between Ukraine and Russia. They're now looking at increasing coal production. You know, the one hotbed of controversy that was expected to be decreased first and foremost is now looking to be increased by 6% over last year. This, of course, is going to increase carbon emissions globally when we're desperate to reduce them and cause the dramatic climatic changes we were talking about, especially in the Sahel. The IPCC report has mostly focused on, you know, the human implications, including, let me ask our foreign minister from Mauritania here, climate migration. You talked about the internal conflict that can result now from the fighting over resources in your country, but now we saw how Europe responded to economic-induced migration over the past few years. What's supposed to happen now if that economic migration is compounded with climatic migration issues?
Thank you very much. I think as I said, you know, I'm going to focus on the region I know the most. You are absolutely right to ask this link between the climate change, as I said actually in my introduction, and the migration, particularly the external migration. What we have seen in the case of the Sahel is what we call now the Atlantic Road, which in fact goes on the, you know, on the west side, because as you know, traditionally people are thinking that most of the migration coming to Europe came through the Libya road, through Italy, etc., because of course, a lot of effort has been put there to minimize that road. I have to say that recently we have seen an increase in the road in Atlantic, and most of it, I can tell you, is definitely linked to the climate because of the scarcity of water, because of the difficulties to have agricultural areas, and particularly because also of those herders who are also having and seeing their animals being devastated by the effect of drought. So therefore, I will say definitely that's one of the elements. But you know, another point we didn't even mention it, and I told you earlier I wanted to make that transition. One of the biggest problems we are facing on education, on agriculture, is the access, and in industry is the access to energy because of the effect of climate change. And that's why, if you allow me in 2 minutes, I wanted to make the transition to the element of the energy, which I'm sure our colleagues from the private sector and others would be interested to. There are 2 big projects in the Sahel and in Africa, I would say, which I believe are worth mentioning here because a bit of hope. The first one is the one we call the Pan-African Great Green Wall Initiative, which was created in 2015 by 11 African countries. It's about ecosystem, as the wall everybody will think about only green in the sense of creating trees, etc. But also it's a multi-sector approach, which aims particularly to creating jobs. And there are 3 main objectives. The first is to restore 100 hectares of degraded land, because the land really are degraded today by the effects of the ecosystem and the drought and the climate change in general, to store 250 million of carbons, because again, another element, because you mentioned the number of countries who are really the one who are affecting most of the change, while in fact we are getting the worst consequences. The third objective is to create 10 million jobs by 2030, because again, remember that these countries who are most affected are the ones who are seeing their biggest population being young people. This project of the Great Wall, Green Wall, goes along 7,600 kilometers long, 11 countries. It goes from Mauritania in the west up to Eritrea or Ethiopia in the east. So it goes all, when you look at the map of Africa, all these countries are putting together their effort to achieve the element I have spoken earlier. And definitely one of the objectives, because it's a response to your question, is to stop the migration of young people by creating opportunities for jobs. The second project is related to my own country, Mauritania. We are currently developing the world's largest green hydrogen project. You know, Mauritania is a 1 million square kilometers, and that's something which is really very attractive, because most of it is desertic. But we have a lot of wind and a lot of solar capacity. And what we are trying to do is to reposition Mauritania as a regional hub for energy in West Africa, and particularly we are very close to Europe. Remember, we have borders, even maritime borders, with Spain through the island. And so what we have done last year is to sign a memorandum of understanding with a US company called CWP, which is very well known worldwide, for the largest green, as I said, hydrogen project. You know, hydrogen is becoming one of the greatest opportunities. I'm sure in the room many of the specialists know that, particularly the green hydrogen. And it will, at least the ambition is to produce 30 gigawatt of power from solar and wind, 1.7 tons of green hydrogen, and 10 million of ammonia for export. So that's quite important. But another characteristic of this project is also to be able to produce 50 million tons of desalinized water, because we have the Atlantic and want to use this water for agriculture and for other elements. This project today has a provisional investment, let's say budget, of $40 billion. And hopefully we will start in 2027. Obviously, we haven't started yet. We are still looking for partners. So it's definitely, in my view, something very promising, particularly with a partnership, I hope, with Turkey and businessmen in Turkey. And I'm glad we have one of the companies represented here. The aim, obviously, is to create 30,000 jobs in construction, in the construction phase, and 10,000 in operation. As a sign of growing interest of hydrogen for Mauritania, we have a second project we signed this year with Chariot, the very well-known UK company, for a global energy company. This is also on hydrogen, but on a much smaller scale, for 3.5 billion investment with 10 gigawatt of clean energy and 900,000 tons of ammonia. I'm not going to go too much on details, but what I wanted to say, and this is very much in response to the whole challenge, what we are trying to do today in Africa, because we are realizing, to be honest, that great countries, or let's say the great power, the polluters are not doing their job. So what we are trying is to address the point from our own concerns, so it's transformation of our legislative and institutional framework by providing, investment, let's say, incentive for foreign companies, by creating a new energy and a new electricity strategy, roadmap for hydrogen, and encouraging particularly the foreign investment and private sector. Obviously, we work on this with the EU, the World Bank, and the UN, and what we are really doing, I would say, is a total revamping of energy sector. So despite the difficulties that I explained in the early presentation, with a very green picture, I think many countries, particularly in Africa, and I think my colleague here gave also a good idea about what they are doing in Cameroon. I think we are not waiting, because we know, it's very clear in response to the question, the big power are not doing their job. Therefore, we need to be taking our, I would say, destiny in hands, and I'm glad we are here in a country like Turkey, which I know is also another country who has been able to transform itself in the last 20 years, its economy, and becoming really a very important power, and we hope that between Africa and Turkey we can create some of these conditions which will be creating for us opportunities independent of if the big power will do their part of the job or not. Sorry, maybe it has been too long this time.
No, not at all. I mean,
Thank
just
you
to note, Mauritania's stated goal is to reach universal access of renewable energy, actually, by 2030. That is a very lofty goal, but from what you're saying, it does sound like Mauritania is on track to do so. Mbella, you know, fastest growing populations, but also the least polluting populations are in two of the countries that are on our panel today. In Cameroon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have read several times that biomass consumption equals about 3/4 of Cameroon's energy supply. If you can tell us how that's working for your population, how sustainable it is, and how Cameroon is planning to move its energy transition forward and hopefully become mostly, you know, stay mostly renewable energy resources in the future to help combat the consequences of climate change.
Voilà, merci pour votre question. Je voudrais seulement souligner que, comme tous les pays, le Cameroun a une politique nationale d'énergie et de lutte contre le réchauffement climatique, comme je l'ai dit au début. Mais le problème est aujourd'hui un problème global. Nous sommes dans la sous-région d'Afrique centrale, que vous connaissez, et la région d'Afrique centrale, contrairement à ce que mon collègue a bien décrit en ce qui concerne le Sahel, nous sommes dans la région forestière. Et dans cette région forestière, nous sommes dans le bassin du Congo. Le bassin du Congo, comme vous le savez aujourd'hui, c'est le deuxième massif forestier du monde après l'Amazonie. Il y a donc dans ce massif forestier beaucoup de ressources énergétiques qui sont en train d'être travaillées et essayer de voir quelle est la politique que les pays de la sous-région peuvent mettre en commun pour pouvoir adresser valablement le problème du réchauffement climatique. À ce niveau, les États de l'Afrique centrale ont créé ce que nous appelons la Commission forestière des pays de l'Afrique centrale. Donc, cette commission forestière dont le Cameroun assure opportunément la présidence s'emploie dans 3 secteurs. D'abord, pour essayer de faire en sorte qu'il y ait des aménagements qui sont appropriés pour éviter la dégradation de cette réserve forestière. Parce que le problème de dégradation des paysages et même des forêts est l'une des grandes préoccupations auxquelles nous sommes confrontés. Si la forêt est dégradée au point où l'oxygène et même, comme vous l'avez dit, le réchauffement peut connaître une accentuation, cela porte atteinte aux populations traditionnelles, surtout les populations rurales. Donc le gouvernement, comme je vous l'ai dit au début, a mis en place une forte politique, d'abord qui est basée sur l'hydraulique. L'hydraulique, parce que nous disposons de beaucoup de sources hydrauliques dans notre pays. Nous sommes aussi assez axés sur les nouvelles politiques, comme vous avez dit, de l'utilisation des biomasses, pour permettre que la forêt soit sauvegardée, ou alors, si elle est utilisée, qu'elle ne soit à minima. Et troisièmement, nous avons entrepris dans les pays de la COMEFAC à faire en sorte qu'il y ait des aires protégées. Ces aires protégées nécessitent nécessairement des moyens. Et c'est là où nous avons souvent eu quelques difficultés avec nos partenaires. Tout à l'heure, mon collègue de Mauritanie disait qu'il y a des projets ambitieux qui mériteraient d'être menés, mais qui nécessitent des financements importants. Dans notre région, notre sous-région, nous avons donc ce projet que nous souhaitons voir financé par nos partenaires bilatéraux et internationaux, puisque nous protégeons cette grande forêt du bassin du Congo pour l'intérêt de l'humanité, qu'elle ne se dégrade pas, comme on a vu le cas en Amazonie, mais que la biomasse, que toutes les ressources de la biodiversité soit maintenue pour les équilibres, les grands équilibres. Votre question de savoir comment nous nous faisons, eh bien nous nous faisons d'abord par les moyens mis en place par le gouvernement. Le gouvernement du Cameroun vote un budget dont une grande partie est attribuée au ministère des Forêts, et nous avons non seulement le ministère des Forêts, mais aussi le ministère de l'Environnement qui travaille donc en bonne intelligence, en étroite collaboration pour mettre en place toutes les recommandations et les décisions qui ont été prises au niveau des différents COP pour être en adéquation avec la régulation internationale. Mais nous avons un autre problème, c'est celui d'avoir des financements qui sont décidés tout au long des différents COP, mais qui ne sont jamais déliés. Ces fonds qu'on nous promet et qu'on a toujours promis, par exemple les 100 milliards de dollars US qu'il faut attribuer pour accompagner nos pays dans la mise en pratique de leur politique forestière, ces fonds ne sont pas déliés. Et pour le Cameroun, nous estimons que pour pouvoir avoir accès à ces fonds et nous permettre de mener à bien nos politiques de forêt, nous demandons une affectation entre les volets d'atténuation et les volets d'adaptation. Vous connaissez ces termes techniques, l'adaptation et le volet atténuation. Au lieu que nous soyons dans le processus qui voudrait qu'aujourd'hui, comme la règle est fixée de 75 à 25%, le Cameroun milite, comme vous avez posé la question, pour que la part de l'adaptation qui concerne principalement les pays en développement, parmi lesquels ceux du bassin du Congo, que cette part soit portée au moins à 50% au lieu de 75 et 15%. Enfin, je voudrais souligner, dans le cadre de toute la politique globale du Cameroun en matière de réchauffement climatique, que nous mettons aussi beaucoup l'accent, comme je vous l'ai dit au début, sur le renforcement des capacités. Parce que tout n'est pas d'avoir les moyens, tout n'est pas d'avoir les fonds, mais il faudrait qu'il y ait des experts, des personnes formées pour mener à bien cette politique égalitaire de réchauffement climatique. Voilà ce que je peux dire à ce stade ici. Je suis toujours disposé à continuer à discuter. Merci.
Okay. Expertise, so important indeed. And speaking of expertise, Haka Akil, you work in the private sector. You consult on oil and gas. So I'd like to ask you about that and where you see the future of oil and gas. The world wants renewables, but here we are witnessing the kind of global instability that actually proves how reliant we still are on the oil and gas sector. Where do you see this going, and are you consulting on ways to wean the global population off of non-renewable resources?
Thank you, ma'am, for your question. According to IEA, of course, we will continue to be dependent on oil, hydrocarbon resources until even 2050. But the important issue is to diminish their part in our daily consumption. So if I have to come back to clean energy, because we all know that we will continue in some way to use hydrocarbon resources. It's unavoidable. But we also know that the clean energy will continue, or the clean energy transition will continue to be a part of the global agenda in the upcoming years, for sure. And we also know that the clean energy transition is not only necessary, but it's obligatory. We don't have a choice. If we want to preserve the nature, if we want to preserve the world for upcoming generations, we have to be very sensitive on the climate change issues. So what we will do, I listened very carefully the honorable ministers, and Minister of Mauritania told about hydrogen energy. And I can assure him that Çalık Energy is his new address after CWP and Chayo. And we will be coming to your country at the end of this month, Your Excellency. So, if we pass in review the resources of the energies, I remember in the 80s, 70s, we were using massively fuel and coal to generate electricity. Then gas appeared to be let's say, clean energy resources. And then today we are using a lot of gas all over the world. And unfortunately today we are facing some problems, but gas constitute at that time a resource for clean energy. But for zero carbon emissions today, we know that gas is not enough to protect the nature. So we have to find new resources, energy resources. And hydrogen is, for today, the answer to zero carbon emissions. So we have green energy. What is green energy? How we can use hydrogen? First, we have to produce energy from the renewables, solar, wind, and hydro. And then we have to use that energy to produce hydrogen from water. And then when we will produce that hydrogen, we have to store that hydrogen to produce, to include it in gas or other resources to produce energy, what we call green energy. If we include that hydrogen in the pipelines with gas, we call it blue energy. And both are very useful, but we still, let's say, not at the zero carbon emission, but we are near, I can say. So, as Çalık Energy today, we have an R&D department with 18 engineers working on that issue, and I can say that in the upcoming years with our global partners, we will be able to use hydrogen energy to produce, to generate electricity. And I'm very happy when I was listening to the Minister of Energy, who has now large resources of gas and oil, thanks to the field in Atlantic Ocean. And we have to work. I mean, the politicians, they can always take decisions, but they need, of course, private sector to invest and to be their partner. And we always consider ourselves as Çalık Energy to be solution partners of the government. So we are always ready to work on those issues. As I said, in the past we were building gas power plants, and still we are continuing to build gas power plants. For instance, in Senegal now we are building one gas power plant of 360 megawatt. And we will continue. We will build another one next to Mauritanian border for 250 megawatts. And we are also now negotiating. We will finalize it to build 1,000 megawatt solar energy in one African country. So the private sector is aware of the dangers of the climate change. And then, on our side, we are taking the necessary steps to work with the governments and to concretize their policies. Until today, as I said before, gas was considered as a clean energy, and we built more than 11,000 megawatt of gas power plants. Okay. And tomorrow, we will start to use hydrogen for electricity generating. That's what I can say from the perspective of private sector. We are ready to work with you, Mr.
Very
Minister.
interesting. Fantastic. I'm just going to ask very quickly, I don't have a timer here. How much longer? No, how much longer? Because if I have a little more time, I have a few more questions. If not, I'll turn it over to the audience. Nekada? Okay, I'm not getting an answer. Just very quickly then. Sorry, guys. You can tell me when we're out of time. Okay, give me the signal. Cut. Just very quickly. This might seem, like I don't know, a crystal ball type of question, but the IPC says there is this window of opportunity for action, and they warned it is closing quickly. The UN actually said delay is death. It's that dramatic. Do you think we'll get there? Seeing what you've seen in the energy sector, can we make it? Can we meet the goals necessary to avoid the kind of disaster that's been predicted for this planet if we don't reach the goals of the Paris Climate Accord and the IPCC?
Okay, probably we should be asking the specialist. I am not really, I have to confess, as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, I deal with this issue from a political point of view. But I'm also, as a diplomat, always optimistic. I'm trying to look at things optimistically. The reason I mentioned earlier the 2015 Agreement of Paris is my strong conviction that was the turning point where many countries came together. Even if we saw later the US getting out of the agreement and coming back, I think that was the wake-up call, when young people were trying to all go behind us and nobody wanted really to follow at that specific moment. But suddenly I think there was a wake-up call. Are we there? We are definitely at a very, very risky, I would say, time. And definitely we have seen. But as I told you earlier, even the poorest country are not waiting. As you have seen from my colleague from Bella, from Cameroon, and we talk about other countries. There are initiatives coming in. The hydrogen, the green hydrogen is one of them. The use of water, the solar. We have so much solar in Africa. And also the use of wind. So I think countries are not just waiting. The clean energy is coming. I agree. I think the hydrocarbon will be there with us for a while. That's unavoidable, unfortunately. But there is already this combination of using the gas to help in the clean energy as an element of transition. So my strong conviction as a diplomat that and knowing the capacity, and particularly, I look at young people here in the room. I think the strong will of the young generation, the effect, the research today, I believe we will make it, but definitely is there a risk? I know, I acknowledge there is a big risk, but I'm optimistic we will make it.
Okay. It's good to hear a sense of optimism. Mbella, do you share that optimism as well?
Well, partially. Je pense que votre question est bonne, mais nous devons reconnaître qu'il faudrait une mobilisation de toute la communauté internationale pour résoudre ce problème de changement climatique. Le problème qui se pose aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas tant d'identifier les problèmes. Les problèmes sont connus. C'est les moyens qu'il faut mettre pour pouvoir résoudre ces problèmes. Jusqu'à l'heure actuelle, madame, la difficulté des pays en développement, c'est de pouvoir accéder à ces fonds pour pouvoir attaquer les problèmes de transition climatique et les problèmes de réchauffement climatique. Ce que nous, on suggère, c'est qu'il y ait la simplification dans les procédures d'accessibilité à ces fonds. Tant qu'il n'y a pas de moyens, on ne peut pas forcément arriver au résultat que vous escomptez, à savoir si vraiment on va réussir d'atteindre la transition climatique. Il faut vraiment des moyens. Les moyens sont là, vous le savez bien. Les fonds ont été proposés. Il faut maintenant arriver à aider nos pays à pouvoir accéder à ces fonds par la simplification des procédures de pouvoir les avoir. Nos gouvernements font déjà beaucoup d'efforts sur des budgets souvent assez fragiles, qui sont parfois confrontés à d'autres difficultés. Mon frère et collègue a dit tout à l'heure les problèmes de terrorisme qui sont liés aussi, qui aggravent ces situations-là. Or, nous avons à défendre donc nos sécurités, nous avons à défendre la stabilité de nos pays, et nous avons à maintenant lutter contre la transition climatique, qui peut être un élément de déstabilisation des pays. Parce que s'il n'y a pas les ressources, comme il l'a dit tout à l'heure, ça entraîne des immigrations, ça entraîne des conflits interethniques, ça entraîne des mouvements de population vers d'autres zones, et ce qui devient donc incontrôlable. En même temps qu'on veut gérer les problèmes climatiques, on doit gérer les problèmes de migration, on doit gérer les problèmes de l'environnement. Donc il y a nécessité, il y a urgence de ce que les moyens qui ont été promis, que ces moyens-là soient mis à disposition. C'est là aussi l'un des problèmes. Pour faire une politique, il faut avoir les moyens de sa politique. Si nous voulons gérer le changement climatique, la réduction du réchauffement climatique, il nous faut mettre en place toute une diplomatie environnementale qui permet de résoudre ces problèmes. Voilà ce que je peux dire. Mais l'espoir est toujours permis et je partage son avis. En diplomatie, même quand les situations sont les plus difficiles, nous pensons qu'il y a toujours une porte, une fenêtre pour pouvoir faire avancer les négociations et les projets. Voilà, je termine aussi sur la note d'optimisme. L'être humain est capable de beaucoup de ressorts, il est capable de beaucoup de sagesse pour pouvoir résoudre les problèmes dans l'environnement auquel il est confronté. Voilà ce que je peux dire.
Thank you so much. Akil, can consumers, governments, private sector collectively stop that tiny window of opportunity from closing? How are you feeling about it?
Of course, by nature I'm optimistic. And also, as a former diplomat, I was optimistic, and I tried to underline and to find a political solution to the problems. And today, as a private sector, we are trying to find the concrete solutions to the problems. The Italians are saying, Roma non è fatto in un giorno. So Roma was not built in one day, which means that we have to continue to work to arrive, to obtain the expected solution. I refer to the meeting in '92, to Rio. Since Rio, you see how many years we spent. So, but today, the situation becomes more and more urgent. And it's up to the public society and non-governmental organizations to put pressure on the politicians to take the necessary steps, necessary decisions to fight the climate change, because otherwise we will talk in the panels and then we will try to find the solution. But first, it's up to the politicians to take the necessary decisions, to make the necessary steps. But today, hopefully, I noticed that the governments also are aware of the dangers of the or urgence, emergence of the situation. And when we see all the works done in EU with the green agenda and all those subsidies, I am more optimistic than myself for the future.
Okay, good to hear. I'm going to open it up to the floor now and ask her, any audience members who have questions. I believe there's a microphone. There she is. Anyone who has a question, please do raise your hand and we'll try to get to everybody. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bora Özcan. I am a bachelor student of international relations. My question is to Sheikh Ahmed. We've been talking about green energy transition, and however, the Bank of America has published recently that this will cost about $100 trillion. And also, as far as I'm concerned, when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, prices are rising quickly. And when all these taken into account, isn't it better for us to invest in across all options, including power plants? Thank you.
Go ahead. Yes, respond now.
No, I think it's a very relevant question. I think we are all facing this problem. Actually, you know, and Minister Mbella knows this, our countries have been quite clear that we should not be imposed only clean energy. You know, the countries particularly the Western countries, have taken their own development to a certain degree, and now we are told clearly what I was trying to explain on the future of green hydrogen, or on the future of, when I spoke about the great green wall as a way of addressing some of our challenges, I still believe, and I agree with you, and actually I didn't speak about this, but Hakim spoke about it, this option of Mauritania undertaking also a project on gas together with Senegal. We are working now on a gas project which is going to certainly become a transformation also of our economy. And building on that project, we are going to develop the hydrogen. But I agree with you, we can't rely only on that. It's clearly the future. It's something we need to have and it's good that our countries are suddenly starting to think 10 years ahead, rather than waiting to be completely in the dark side. But unavoidably, and I'm sure it's the young people who are telling us, unavoidably the line, I would say the direction to go is the direction of the clean energy. But you are absolutely right. I think your question contains already the response. It's a very, I would say, informed and very intelligent question. It's clear that we need to keep our, let's say, not to put all our eggs in the same basket. That's very clear.
Certainly still a need to diversify. Okay, next question? Nothing. Engagement of the audience, mashallah. Don't be shy. If not,
we were so clear and efficient.
Exactly,
and
there's nothing left to ask.
From the audience.
No, actually, okay, then if nobody has any questions, I would like to ask one further question. Because a major concern, and we heard this out of the EU yesterday, and I brought it up already, I would like to talk a little more about climate migration. And really what concrete plans have been made to manage this? Because as I said before, we already saw a migration crisis that was handled rather disastrously, if I can characterize it as that. If we see another one, I'd like to ask first, what preparations have been made on the ground in individual countries? We know a lot of the migration toward Europe does originate in the Sahel region, Cameroon and West Africa as well. What kind of concrete plans are being made in your countries to manage this? Or perhaps the infrastructure is not yet there to try and deal with massive climate migration issues. I'll start here. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think it's a very important question. As I said in my presentation actually earlier, what we are facing in the Sahel, and here I don't speak only about Mauritania, we have seen this issue in Mali, for instance, where we often speak about the local disputes between the Pearl and the Dogo population. The reality is it's a climate conflict, because it starts with the scarcity of water, the lack of places where you can bring your own animals, and therefore you go to the territories of agriculture, and therefore what happens, there are clashes. So, and clearly, so it's not only internal, but you are absolutely right. Many of the young people with the inability to work anymore in the agriculture or on the local level goes then to Europe as a way of migration. So I agree with you. I think it's one of the biggest challenge we have today to face. For me, the only option is starting. That's why I'm saying the migration, the demography are very much linked to the climate change. And we need to understand that with a young population, the only option is to see how can new and emerging industry in the climate change can also generate jobs. And I am totally agreeing with my colleague here. I'm not naive to say my optimism that we have everything we need. But clearly, we are realizing that, as I said earlier, the Western countries are not doing their part of the responsibility, and that's why we rely on private sector. Private sector is going to definitely be one of our key partners, but also we are relying on our own creative mechanism, on our resources. Today, with the solar and the wind, we have an incredible, and water. We have also water, the three elements that you need to be able to generate clean energy. But it will only work if it creates job, because the element of creation of job and revenues is the one that will stabilize and make it, I would say, sustainable in the longer term.
Right.
So I totally agree on that.
But you're saying Western countries haven't taken enough responsibility, but let me ask our minister from Cameroon. Is another crisis unpreventable? Is it unpreventable? Because I'm trying to see if there are some solutions that can be, constructed on the ground in the countries of origin, but I'm not hearing those solutions.
Oui, mais la situation, je l'ai dit, excusez si je me répète, que mon frère a décrit une situation avec beaucoup de précision en ce qui concerne le Sahel. Nous, dans la forêt, on n'est pas beaucoup confrontés à une grande échelle aux problèmes de migration liés au changement climatique. Nous avons quelques soucis parfois qui sont des problèmes liés aux conflits intercommunautaires pour des problèmes d'agriculture ou de pêche, etc. Mais ces problèmes sont circonscrits et ne donnent pas lieu à une migration massive liée à l'environnement ou aux problèmes climatiques. Toutefois, au niveau interne, nous avons quand même des populations qui émigrent d'une région où il n'y a pas d'eau, où il y a peut-être où la sécheresse règne, pour aller à l'intérieur du pays pour trouver des zones de culture plus viables. Mais en ce qui concerne notre pays et notre sous-région, on n'a pas une migration assez forte liée aux problèmes de changement climatique. Ça, c'est certain. Parce que nous sommes dans la forêt et vraiment, il y a beaucoup d'opportunités. Le ministre l'a souligné, nous avons aussi des grands projets qui sont des projets intégrateurs qui prennent en compte tous les aspects, que ce soit l'agriculture, que ce soit la pêche, que ce soit les problèmes liés à la culture, à l'environnement. Tout cela est suivi par les ministères dédiés. Chez nous, le ministère de l'administration territoriale est celui qui s'occupe des problèmes liés à ces migrations. Mais il travaille en étroite collaboration avec le ministère de la Forêt et le ministère de l'Environnement. Donc il y a toute une politique nationale mise en place pour éviter ces migrations liées aux problèmes de changement climatique. Le niveau chez nous est très relativement bas. Voilà ce que je peux dire à ce niveau.
Okay.
Tout à l'heure, je veux dire un petit mot à mon ami, on se connaît depuis longtemps, à Paris où on était ambassadeurs tous les deux. Je ne veux pas le contredire. Il a dit que la question est entre les mains des politiques. Oui, j'ai dit les politiques ont déjà élaboré tous les programmes. Ce n'est pas, on ne doit pas blâmer les politiques. Les politiques font le travail. Ce qu'il faut, c'est les moyens qu'on réclame. Et je vous ai dit, il y a ces moyens qui sont là, qu'on a dit de pouvoir mettre à la disposition de nos pays, 100 milliards de dollars. Mais jusque-là, les promesses ne sont pas tenues. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez que les politiques fassent? Les politiques ont élaboré des programmes, mais les moyens ne sont pas là. Nous sommes venus donc sensibiliser nos pays amis, la Turquie, de voir dans quelle mesure on peut travailler dans une coopération mutuellement bénéfique dans le secteur, n'est-ce pas, du réchauffement climatique et de la transition climatique. Voilà ce que nous pouvons dire. Merci.
Indeed. Akil, I mean, are developed countries actually hearing developing countries when they say, wait a minute, why are we paying the ultimate price for your pollution and your prosperity? Do they hear them? Do they care?
Si vous demandez à mon voisin, il dit non. No, but it was a subject of negotiations. Of course, they are hearing, but it is not sufficient to hear it. You have to take the necessary steps and necessary decisions. So, this is...
Go ahead and engage. You can press your microphone. Engage if you...
This is an ongoing negotiation. So, at the end, I hope that we will find some kind of consensus and fight together, developing and developed countries, the climate change issues, because now we all know that it is not a problem only for developing or developed countries. It's a global issue. But if you ask me my personal view, I think the developed countries should be more generous than they are during the negotiations, because after all, my neighbor, my dear friend, my colleague is right. They didn't make this pollution. The developing countries, maybe except one in Asia, maybe he polluted more than others, but now I'm not anymore diplomatic civil servant, so I can speak freely.
I guess, I mean, and I hate to sound so cynical, but the sad reality.
I think that the developed countries should be more effort to help the developing world, especially Africa, to fight against the climate change, against the natural disasters.
Indeed.
So this is
as I was saying, though, I'd hate to sound cynical, but the sad reality of the last 8-9 years of global politics, we've seen countries really turn inward, you know, putting their own interests first, more and more so all the time. That's going to need to change if we're going to address this calamity together, because we're all going to pay in the end. But that actually wraps up our session. We're going to leave it there now. That's been very quickly, if you do have a question, very quickly, I can give you a couple minutes.
To be as brief as possible, I'm Ismail Utkucan-Türk. I'm a PhD student in Akdeniz University, Department of International Relations. And thank you so much for all of our distinguished participants for your presentation. And my question is going to go to Mr. Akil. I was actually wondering about whether do you have any programs or plans regarding the incentivification of other Turkish energy companies into the commendable endeavors that your company is, performing right now in terms of combating environmental degradation and decarbonization. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Of course, we have some global partners, and if there are some Turkish companies who would like to join that effort, we have to sit down and to see what we can do together. If there is some room to cooperate, of course we are ready to cooperate, because as I said, it's a human issue, and as Çalık Energy we are ready to find out a solution for the climate change problems with our Turkish partners and also with our international partners, global partners. Thank you.
Okay. Haka Akil, Ismail Ould Sheikh Mohammed, and Mbella, thank you all three so much for joining us on this fascinating panel. And for all of you for being with us as well, thank you.